Hello, and welcome to this video, which is meant to serve as a quick start guide to how to write academic essays. An academic essay is a piece of writing conforming to certain standards within which you are supposed to respond to a task, broadly speaking. The Academic English Guide outlines what these standards are, as well as some typical language issues that you should be aware of. This video introduces the basics. So, you've been given an essay task, and you might ask yourself, where do I begin? The answer is, you should begin by reading the assignment carefully. Essay topic. Compare the differing attitudes to love in two texts from your reading list and discuss their presentation of this topic. In this example, there are two types of words you should take note of. First, and simplest, are the words that have to do with the subject matter. Differing attitudes, love, and two texts from your reading list. It almost goes without saying, but if your essay does not address these things, or if it begins to address and spend more time on other topics, or the same topic in texts not on your reading list, it will lead to bad grades or potentially a failing grade. Now, most people get this right. But there are times when panic sets in and focus is lost, so it is worth being reminded that you need to stay on topic. Next, and just as important, are compare, discuss, and presentation. Here, it is vital that you take note of all these words because, again, you need to perform all these activities in order to achieve academic success. The most important of all these words in this particular example is presentation. It is the most important word because if we are going to perform a comparison, we need some material to compare. In a literary context, presentation means literary devices, and in a poem we think of things such as imagery, rhyme, rhythm, and so on. More generally, we call these things style or form. Here are two poems written especially for this video. One poem is called Sad Love Poem, and the other is called Love is Beautiful. They are not good poems, but that doesn't matter. Sad Love Poem. Love sucks. I hate love. Love hates me. She has no idea. Blithely drinks her tea and keeps watching TV. Love is beautiful. Love is like a many-coloured flower, prettifying my lady's lovely bower. I have wasted many an idle hour, looking for her at her tallish tower. Looking very quickly at these poems, we find that the former has a negative attitude to love, and the latter a more positive one. That much is obvious, but won't take us very far. We need to understand why one poem has a negative effect and the other a positive one. Looking more closely, we can see some similarities and differences. The Sad Love Poem has two stanzas and very short, almost blunt lines. The first stanza talks about love in general, using words such as hate and sucks, and the second stanza describes the uninterested love interest, a woman more concerned with tea drinking and television than with the speaker. There are some rhymes, but there is no regular rhythm or meter. It has no obvious similes or metaphors. The positive love poem, by contrast, consists of one single stanza. It rhymes throughout, and the lines appear to be iambic pentameter with 5 stressed syllables to each line. It is not quite regular, but close. The first line contains a simile. Love is like a flower. So, by beginning with the last word in the assignment, presentation, we have made some discoveries that we can use to start producing a comparison between the two poems. In other words, when you have read the assignment, then you should read the relevant texts and analyze them to the best of your abilities to gather the materials you need. The skills needed to do so are skills we teach at this course and in the Licker pages, so don't worry if you don't know what a simile is yet, or iambic pentameter. How then do we organize the comparison? Simply put, there are two ways of doing it. One way is to discuss the entirety of the one text, then the entirety of the other, and then compare them. The structure then would look like this. Introduction, discussion of poetic devices in sad love poem, discussion of poetic devices in Love is Beautiful, comparison, and conclusion. In many cases, this is the easiest and tidiest way to structure a short comparative essay, but it's probably not the best way to do it. A more challenging but usually more rewarding composition compares the texts alternately throughout the essay. The structure of such an essay would look something like this. Introduction, discussion of rhyme in the two poems, discussion of rhythm and meter in the two poems, discussion of metaphor and imagery in the two poems, and conclusion. Note that in both examples it is absolutely crucial that the discussion of poetic devices is connected with the task at hand, which here is to talk about attitudes to love. What is it about these two poems that make them sad and/or happy in their representations of love? A more precise outline of the structure, then, would look like this. Introduction, discussion of how rhyme contributes to the presentation of love in sad love poem compared to how it contributes to the presentation of love in Love is Beautiful, discussion of how rhythm and meter, etc., 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 until the conclusion. As you can see, the outline is now becoming so wordy that it begins to look like a small essay in its own right. From here on out, it would be fairly easy to finish the discussion and comparison of the two poems. Please note that the middle part of the essay should not contain lengthy summaries or synopses of the texts in question, nor should it reprint the poems. You should imagine when writing an essay that you are writing as one academic to another, as one person familiar with the texts to another person familiar with the texts. And, in fact, you are writing for people who know the texts well and who will only be annoyed if they are reproduced word for word or in paraphrase in an essay. It is very important that you only include paraphrases or quotations from the texts if it is directly useful and necessary to the argument you are making there and then. What you can do and should do is quote the text when relevant. So much for the middle bit of the essay. But what about the beginning and the end? How does one introduce a topic like this, and how does one finish the discussion about it? Introduction first. It should be concrete. It should not generalize too much, and it should be concise. Here is a bad introduction. Love has been a topic of interest to poets for hundreds of years, and in the case of the two love poems, Sad Love Poem and Love is Beautiful, things are no different. In this essay, I will compare and contrast the two poems to see what their different attitudes are to love. Here is a better one. The two poems, Sad Love Poem and Love is Beautiful, present contrasting attitudes to love. In this essay, I claim that both poems present similar situations in which a speaker admires a woman from afar, but where one poem is negative and the other is positive in its outlook. I argue that the poem's use of rhyme, rhythm, and imagery contribute to creating this impression. The bad introduction is bad, not just because it is very cliched, but because it doesn't actually say anything concrete about what the essay will contain. The good introduction, by contrast, is good precisely because it tells the reader, without any ado, that the poems do contrast, that there are some similarities as well as differences, and that the essay will consist in a formal analysis of different poetic devices. An examiner who sees the first kind of opening groans with impatience. An examiner who sees the second type of opening perks up in hopeful anticipation. How then about the conclusion? Here are two more examples. Bad. In this essay, I have compared and contrasted the two poems to see what their different attitudes are to love. Now, the problem with this conclusion is that it is simply the bad introduction written in the past tense. It provides no additional information, no knowledge, no actual conclusion. Good. The differences between the two poems, then, are not really differences in the situation of the speaker, because neither speaker has achieved intimate contact with the person they admire. But the language in the two poems generates contrasting attitudes through the coloration of the words, hate versus prettifying, through the difference between irregular and regular meters, through using and not using similes, etc., etc. This second example is more concrete and summarizes the most important observations and arguments made throughout the essay in a concise manner. In short essays, especially literature essays, the conclusion isn't always the most important part, however, as it can be more open-ended. What has been said about literature and poetry in this video is largely applicable to essays about culture, history, and society too, and with some adjustments, this can be applied to essays that are not comparisons. Texts about history use literary and rhetorical devices as well, and can and should be analysed critically. In short, the purpose of an academic essay is not just to describe what, but primarily to explain how. To conclude, here is a summary. Please note that we advise beginning with the middle part of the essay before you write the introduction and conclusion.